Hello and welcome to Samuel's Fortress. I'm your host Kirill, and today we're going to be discussing the ongoing protests in Macedonia, in the city of Skopje. We're going to be talking about who the protesters are, what they want, what sparked these protests, things along those lines. So, like I said, these protests, which started in late June, early July of this year, so about a week or so ago, these protests are led by the opposition parties against the government, against the governing coalition. And for those of you who are not aware, the opposition at this time is led by the party DPMNE, the Democratic Party for Macedonian National Unity, which is led by Hristijan Mickoski. Now, I refuse to call this party VMRO DPMNE or use the term VMRO or IMRO in any way to associate it with this party. This party has no, in my opinion, no legitimate connection to the historic IMRO. It doesn't share any of the ideological or philosophical foundations of the historic IMRO. So to me, it's just DPMNE. And again, they're led by Hristijan Mickoski. The other kind of opposition party, which is much smaller than DPMNE, but very loud in these protests, is Levica, or the left, which are led by Dimitar Apasiev. So those are the two main opposition parties which are leading these protests against the government. And the governing coalition, is led by SDSM, the Social Democratic Union of Macedonia, which is led by Dimitar Kovachevski, who recently took over when Zoran Zaev, the former prime minister and leader of SDSM, stepped down. The other main party in the governing coalition is DUI, or DUI, the Democratic Union for Integration. That is the main ethnic Albanian party in Macedonia, which is led by Ali Ahmeti. So those are the players, if you will, the opposition and the governing coalition. Now, the opposition is at this time, through these protests, calling for the government to step down. They're calling for early elections, and what sparked these protests and these calls for early elections is the government's acceptance of the quote-unquote French proposal. Now, this French proposal, which is not that accurately named, this is essentially a proposal put forward by the European Union in regard to Macedonia, North Macedonia's accession into the European Union. Now, in mid-June of this year, of 2022, the European Union, through President Emmanuel Macron, who was the rotating president of the European Council. There's a 6-month rotation throughout the EU Council, and for the first half of this year, of 2022, through the end of June, Emmanuel Macron and the French were leading that rotating presidency. And during this period, during the month of June, this document, which is known as the French proposal, was put forward, and essentially it's a kind of draft proposal of the framework that North Macedonia has to follow in order to kind of go through this process of accession into the European Union. It basically lays out the criteria, the procedure that the Macedonians need to follow if they want to become members of the European Union. Now, this document, this proposal, really wasn't, from what I can tell, meant for public release. It appears to have been leaked and kind of became public, but this was part of kind of behind-the-scenes negotiations in regard to, again, Macedonia's accession. And there was a lot of anger and disapproval of this quote-unquote French proposal by the Macedonian side because, based on the text of that proposal, it appeared to support the Bulgarian position in regard to Macedonia's accession into the European Union. It seemed to support the requirements that Bulgaria had put forward in order to lift the veto or blockade for Macedonia's accession into the European Union. Now, at first, when this document kind of was leaked in late June, Dimitar Kovachevski, the Prime Minister of Macedonia, said that he and his party do not support this French proposal, and initially he made it seem as if his party was rejecting it and was not in agreement with the terms that the European Union was putting forward. Now, since then, apparently there's been some slight modifications or amendments to this agreement, to this French proposal. And since then, it appears that SDSM, the party, the governing party, and Dimitar Kovachevsky, the prime minister, now have changed their mind and are supporting this amended second draft of the French proposal. It's a little bit confusing on why he would accept it, based off what appear to be some very minor, insignificant changes. What changed his mind, but nevertheless, as of right now, I'm filming this on July 10th, 2022. The French proposal appears to have the backing of the Macedonian prime minister. And over the past day or two, there was a televised interview with the president of Macedonia, Stevo Pendarovski, who was also a member of the SDSM party, and he also indicated his approval of this French proposal, of the framework that the European Union is putting forward in regard to Macedonia's accession. So by accepting this French proposal, which the opposition sees as a betrayal to Macedonia's national interests, that is what sparked these protests, and that is the reason why the opposition parties are calling for the government to step down. Now, the reason why this veto or blockade, however you want to think of it, is in place is because Bulgaria feels that the Macedonians aren't fulfilling certain commitments they made to Bulgaria in accordance to a previously signed treaty back in 2017. So back in 2017, there was a treaty known as the Treaty of Friendship, Good Neighborliness, and Cooperation between Macedonia and Bulgaria, and that was this friendship treaty, as I'll just refer to it as, was signed by the then Prime Minister of Macedonia, Zoran Zaev, and the then Prime Minister of Bulgaria, Boyko Borisov. What this treaty does is essentially it contains a framework, it contains these kind of general provisions for improving the relationship between the two neighboring states. Basically, Bulgaria believes that certain reforms must be made in Macedonia, in the Republic of North Macedonia, in order to improve the relationship between, again, those two neighboring states. For example, Bulgaria feels that the Macedonians should work on putting an end to discrimination against Bulgarians within North Macedonia, ending of hate speech against Bulgarians. For example, references in Macedonia to Bulgarians as Mongols, Tatars, fascist occupiers, things along those lines, burning or in otherwise desecrating Bulgarian flags, so on and so forth. Additionally, the Bulgarians feel that the Macedonian constitution should include the Bulgarians in it as a constituent part of the Macedonian state, the same way other nations are listed in the Macedonian constitution, whether they're Bosniaks, Montenegrins, Croatians. There are other national groups, ethnic groups listed in the Macedonian constitution, and the Bulgarians feel that they should be in the constitution as well, especially after the recent census, which indicated there are at least 3,500 Bulgarians within the Republic of North Macedonia. So that's one of the demands. Additionally, the Bulgarians want to see historical reforms within Macedonia that undo falsifications or, let's say, malicious revisions to the common history between the two modern states of Bulgaria and Macedonia. So there's other things that the Bulgarians kind of feel that need to be implemented in order to kind of realize that friendship treaty from 2017, but that's kind of the gist of what the Bulgarians are looking for. Now, this French proposal basically states that in order to begin these accession talks into the European Union, the Macedonians must implement provisions of not just the friendship treaty with Bulgaria, but also the Prespa agreement with Greece, that the Macedonians must implement the provisions of these agreements in good faith in order to begin the accession talks. So what this French proposal does is it takes kind of this bilateral dispute between North Macedonia and Bulgaria. It turns it from a kind of private dispute between the two states as into a criteria for EU membership. Basically, the European Union says to the Macedonians, listen, you signed this agreement with Bulgaria. It was signed by your prime minister. It was signed by their prime minister. You need to implement these provisions which are contained within this treaty, this agreement, in order to begin EU accession talks. So the EU is taking, in essentially what they're doing is they're taking these terms and making them a part of the accession process. So this is no longer simply a Macedonia-Bulgaria issue. It's a EU issue, if you want to think of it that way. Now, the opposition, like I said, Dopamane, Levica, they're very much opposed to this whole French proposal, the way this is, the EU accession talks are being negotiated, the tying of the Bulgarian treaty into Macedonia's EU accession and so forth. And the opposition basically sees this whole French proposal as a Bulgarian victory, as forcing the Macedonians to accept these Bulgarian terms, regardless of the fact that the Macedonian government, through Zoran Zaev, agreed to these terms in the 2017 agreement. They feel that this is a betrayal of the Macedonian national idea, that if these reforms are implemented, it will lead to assimilation of the Macedonians into the Bulgarian nation. It will lead to a Bulgarization, essentially, of the modern Macedonians. I don't believe that. I think that's very much overblown and exaggerated. But that's how the opposition, that's how Christian Mickoski is framing this French proposal. And basically the opposition protesters, not just of Dopamane, but also Levica and the other people who are out in the streets, their position is that they do want to enter the European Union, but they don't want to sacrifice or give up any portion of the Macedonian identity as they see it in order to enter the European Union. Basically, it's not worth going into the European Union if sacrificing the ethnicity, language, various other national characteristics as they see it of the Macedonian language are going to be a part of that negotiation. Some people believe that even discussing these types of issues related to national character, whether it's ethnicity, language, history, etc., are illegitimate to begin with and should be taken off the table when we're talking about accession into the European Union. So, again, these are the reasons why the protesters are calling for the government to step down, why they're calling for early elections. It's based off of what they see as a betrayal of the government towards the national sovereignty, if you will, of the Macedonians. Now, in the past, I've given my opinion on this whole Macedonia-Bulgaria dispute and the fact that I think, and I still continue to think, that the solution to this dispute is actually pretty straightforward and simple. Even if we leave aside the whole EU accession process, if we just kind of look at restoring healthy neighborly relations between the two states, if they are to have normal bilateral relations with one another going forward in the future, both sides have to address kind of the main complaint, if you will, from the other side. And I do believe that both sides have at least one major legitimate complaint against the other. For example, I think the Macedonians are correct and have a right to demand that the Bulgarians recognize a separate Macedonian ethnicity and a separate Macedonian language currently as they exist today in the 21st century. From the Bulgarian side, I think they are totally correct in demanding that Macedonia make historical reforms within the country, within its education system, in accordance with objective world history, and to end these falsifications and malicious revisions to history that also affects Bulgaria's history and so forth. So if we kind of just first go to the Macedonian demands, which are, it's a bit of a two-parter. They're asking for, ethnicity and language, but they all kind of come together. Even though those are two separate things, it's all part of a package of Bulgaria recognizing the modern state of Macedonian national consciousness and so forth. So if we just kind of focus in on the ethnic identity first, I think that it's nonsensical that Bulgaria continues to deny the existence of a modern Macedonian ethnicity. Whether Bulgarians like it or not, a separate and unique modern Macedonian identity exists. It exists today, again, whether the Bulgarians like it or not. And that does not mean that Bulgaria has to accept all the kind of fringe or outlandish claims that certain Macedonians attach to the modern Macedonian ethnicity, such as ancient Macedonism and so forth. But just that Bulgaria recognize the current reality that there is a separate Macedonian ethnicity as we sit here today in the year 2022. Even if you're a Bulgarian and you think the Macedonian ethnicity is a Titoist creation, a Titoist fabrication, at the end of the day, whether Tito created it or not, however it came about, it does exist today. Even if it's a Titoist fabrication, it exists nevertheless. So continuing to deny the existence of modern Macedonians, I think, is a non-starter from the beginning. I don't see how Bulgarians think that they're going to establish any sort of healthy or meaningful relations with the Macedonians when they deny that the Macedonians exist. It's, again, an automatic deal breaker, not just for these EU discussions, but for any sort of normal relationship between the two states. I think Bulgaria must admit that a separate Macedonian ethnicity exists, and from what I can tell, most Bulgarians don't have a problem with that. Now, the second part of the Macedonian identity issue, the second demand, if you will, from the Macedonian side, is in regard to a separate Macedonian language, and I think this part is much more complicated than the ethnic identity part. I think most Bulgarians are prepared to recognize a separate Macedonian ethnicity, but have more of a hang-up when it comes to recognizing a separate Macedonian language. And I think there's some legitimate pushback from the Bulgarian side as far as a separate Macedonian language and so forth. Personally, I've always found the kind of language portion of the dispute to be kind of odd. As an American, someone who grew up here in the United States, I've never really thought of language as having that crucial a role in the national or ethnic identity as the Balkaners appear to. For example, there's different national or ethnic groups that all speak the same language. For example, English. There are, people in Britain, in England. There are Canadians, Americans, Australians, New Zealanders, other people who all speak English, yet have their own unique national or ethnic identities. Same thing with the Spanish-speaking world. There are many, many countries around the world that speak Spanish, yet all have their own separate, unique national or ethnic identities, whether it's Mexican, Nicaraguan, Colombian, Argentinian, Chilean, what have you. So I've never really understood the hang up when it comes to what the language is called. It seems to me that what your national or ethnic identity is doesn't have to exactly mirror the name of your language. I think this is a weird Balkan complex. I've said this before. I just don't. It doesn't resonate with me as an American. This language hang up, but I think since everyone in the Balkan is playing this game where, like I said, what I consider to be one language, Serbo-Croatian. Croatians consider it to be Croatian, Serbians consider it Serbian, the Bosniaks consider it Bosnian, the Montenegrins consider it Montenegrin, and so forth. If the Macedonians want to call their South Slavic dialect Macedonian, I really don't care, to be quite honest. I've never really, the language portion of this whole debate is the least important to me personally. I think that, it's not a huge deal for Bulgaria to agree to a separate Macedonian language. I mean, in my opinion, I've said this before in the past, I think that the South Slavic languages are basically, one language, let's call it South Slavic, that has two separate branches. The Western South Slavic language family, let's call it Serbo-Croatian, and you have the Eastern branch, Macedono-Bulgarian. I think in both the Serbo-Croatian and the Macedono-Bulgarian branch, there is a continuum of regional dialects. And I think the modern kind of codification, the 20th century codification of standardized Macedonian and standardized Bulgarian is a bit artificial. I think that the more natural way, the kind of historically the way people treated a language is, there's, again, from, let's say, Ohrid to the Black Sea, there's a continuum of different regional dialects, and everyone speaks in their regional dialect. For example, when I speak Macedonian, I don't speak standardized or codified Macedonian. I speak Prespansky, or the Prespa regional dialect. That's how my parents speak. That's how my grandparents speak. That's how my ancestors spoke. That no one in my family currently or previously speaks standardized or codified Macedonian. I certainly don't speak codified or standardized Bulgarian. I speak a regional dialect of this, again, Macedono-Bulgarian language continuum, which is part of the South Slavic language family. I don't really care whether it's called, Macedonian, Bulgarian, Macedono-Bulgarian, West-South Slavic, or East-South Slavic. It just doesn't matter to me what the language is called. And I think as a sign of goodwill, the Bulgarians should just give Macedonians the recognition on this front and just say, okay, fine, you guys consider your language Macedonian. We'll respect that, and we'll refer to your language as Macedonian, and so forth. So I think from the Macedonian side, those are the two big parts of the identity issue: the recognition of a separate Macedonian ethnicity and a separate Macedonian language from the Bulgarian side. I think if Bulgaria recognizes that, essentially the Macedonian requirements from Bulgaria are satisfied, are fulfilled. Now, if we move over to what the Bulgarians want, here we're talking primarily about historical reforms. So, and here I think Bulgaria absolutely has a legitimate right to demand that, again, these malicious revisions, these falsifications of history come to an end and are fixed, essentially, are reformed. The clearest and the easiest period of history, of Macedonian and Bulgarian history, to clear up is the medieval period. I think on this front, Macedonia has engaged in absurd levels of revisionism, manufacturing churches and empires and kingdoms that don't exist, that are not recognized anywhere in world history, that are not cited in the original sources, in Byzantine, Roman sources, and so forth. For example, Macedonian claims, ethnic claims on, let's say, Saint Clement of Ohrid or of Tsar Samuel are completely based in fantasy. These were, Saint Clement was a bishop of the Bulgarian Orthodox Church. The entire Orthodox Church from Constantinople to Moscow recognizes that Clement was the bishop of the Bulgarian Church, not some Macedonian church, which doesn't appear anywhere in the history of Orthodoxy during that time period. It exists today, but not back then. Same thing with Tsar Samuel. The entire world knows that Tsar Samuel was the emperor or the Tsar of the First Bulgarian Empire. Whether it's American historians, European historians, British historians, Russian historians, they all testify to this fact. The Byzantine record is very clear on who Tsar Samuel was, what country he led, what empire he led, and so forth. So the medieval period is the easiest to clear up. The Macedonians say, well, the Bulgarian claims that St. Clement was a Bulgarian, or that Tsar Samuel was a Bulgarian. Those are just Bulgarian propaganda. Well, it's kind of hard to claim they're Bulgarian propaganda when everyone, except for you, claims that that's the way it is. If everyone says one thing and you're saying another thing, it's probably you that's incorrect, not everyone else. So this Macedonians trying to get away with saying, oh, that's just Bulgarian propaganda, isn't going to fly. And the fact is that the Macedonians unwisely chose to create national myths based on clearly untrue facts, and now it's their problem to fix that and to walk that back. The same way they had to do with the Greeks in the Prespa agreement. And the Macedonians made very ridiculous, absurd, outlandish claims in regard to ancient Macedonia, and then were forced to walk those back. in accordance with that Prespa agreement. So unfortunately, that's what the Macedonians are going to have to do. It's going to be humiliating the way it was with the Greeks, but the Macedonians frankly put themselves in that position to where now they have to walk back these absurd claims that no one forced them to make in the first place. So the medieval history to me is completely uncontroversial that these figures were Bulgarian, and the Macedonians should reform their history to reflect that fact. Now, once we get to kind of the more modern history, for example, the let's say 1878, post Treaty of Berlin period, from there to, let's say, 1944, 1945, things get a lot messier here. There are a lot more gray. There were a lot of different people, different ideologies, different goals, and so forth. So let's say that the modern post-1878 history is a bit murkier and not as easy to reform, but it's still possible. What I would say in regard to this modern history is the path that the two countries should take is simply to allow the documents and the people to speak for themselves. For example, if someone in the late 19th, early 20th century in Macedonia declared himself in his writings and what have you, he declared himself as a Bulgarian, that the Macedonian historiography will reflect that person as a Bulgarian. That declaration, that reality is respected. Now, this would bring an end to these crude revisions where we simply scratch out where it says Bulgarian, write in Macedonian, or these kind of slimy revisionist attempts where, certain Macedonists will say, well, it might say Bulgarian, he might say he's a Bulgarian, but Bulgarian didn't mean Bulgarian, it meant something else. These kind of ways to weasel out of very clear declarations of people who stated openly that they were Bulgarians. That basically the rule as far as the modern history should be, if someone declared himself to be a Bulgarian, we treat him in the history as a Bulgarian. And if someone said, even in the 19th century, I'm a pure ethnic Macedonian, I have nothing to do with Bulgaria, okay, that person can be written down in the Macedonian historiography as an ethnic Macedonian, no problem. But if he says he's a Bulgarian, he's a Bulgarian. For example, Vasil Chocolatov in his diary says, I'm a Bulgarian. We're not going to go back and say, well, he didn't know what Bulgarian meant. Bulgarian meant something else back then. He was really an ethnic Macedonian, even though he wrote down Bulgarian. That's not going to fly. And it does a disservice not only to Bulgarian history, and it's a vandalism of Bulgarian history, but it also, again, clouds the perception of the Macedonians themselves in regard to who they were, who their national heroes, revolutionaries were, and so forth. So basically these historical reforms should reflect the reality as these people put forward themselves as to who they were, what they were fighting for, and so forth. The modern Macedonians do not have a right to vandalize Bulgarian history. They don't have a right to vandalize the self-identification of dead people, essentially. That's completely unacceptable and should not be tolerated by Bulgaria. Now, I have absolutely no idea what's going to happen as far as, not just these protests are concerned, but with the EU accession process as a whole. I mean, it's unclear at this point whether the Macedonians have the will to abide by the terms of the friendship treaty with Bulgaria, which is now not just a requirement from Bulgaria, but also from the European Union, that the Macedonians, in good faith, implement the provisions contained within that 2017 treaty with Bulgaria. For example, if the Macedonians are to add the Bulgarians into the constitution, to the Macedonian constitution, that will require a supermajority, a two-thirds vote, based on my understanding, and it's really unclear whether there's enough Macedonian politicians who are willing to make that happen. It's unclear whether the Macedonians at this point even want to enter the European Union if they have to make these concessions to Bulgaria. Some Macedonians are just saying, listen, these demands, these reforms are too much for us, and if this is what's going to be required for us to enter into the European Union, then we don't want to enter into the European Union at all. These basically the stakes are too high, the requirements are too high, and we'd rather just not be part of the European Union. Bulgaria is certainly not going to lift its veto, its blockade, until these concessions are made, until Macedonia implement the provisions within that friendship treaty, because Bulgaria doesn't have to. There's nothing that Bulgaria gets one way or the other from Macedonia's accession to the European Union. I mean, the Bulgarians are already in the organization. There's really nothing the Macedonians can offer them. The Bulgarians really have sort of a take it or leave it sort of approach. If you want to get into the European Union, these are the things you have to do. And if you don't want to do these things, then, be on your way. It doesn't really matter to us. That's kind of the Bulgarian position as far as I see it. So, whether the Macedonians are going to want to implement these reforms in order to start EU accession is really unclear to me at this point in time. Now, in a scenario where the Macedonians kind of throw their hands up and say, we're not doing this anymore, to hell with the European Union, I think, and I don't obviously know this for a fact, I can't, predict what's going to happen, but based on kind of what I've seen and kind of my perception on the inter-ethnic issues in Macedonia, I see that a kind of halt to the EU accession process will cause a lot of tension between ethnic Albanians and ethnic Macedonians in North Macedonia. I mean, the Albanians kind of feel, from their point of view, that they're being held hostage by this Macedonian-Bulgarian dispute that has nothing to do with them. I mean, there's ethnic Albanians in Macedonia who want the country to become an EU member state so they can become members of the European Union, and they feel that there's, this impasse between Macedonia and Bulgaria that's getting in their way of getting into the European Union. And we're not just here talking about, the ethnic Albanians in Macedonia, but also the Albanians in Albania itself will also start, I think, getting fed up with this whole process because, for whatever reason, the European Union has put North Macedonia and Albania into a package. It's kind of, you both are kind of going to go along this EU accession process in tandem as a kind of like a joint package, like I said. So basically the Albanians in Albania are going to view, the Macedonians as holding up their progress into the European Union. So I think the tension between Albanians and ethnic Macedonians will probably grow unless, Macedonia make reforms to allow it to move forward in this, EU accession process. Now, we can already kind of see these ethnic tensions flaring up over the past week. With the protest in Skopje, we saw a clash between Macedonians and Albanians as a large group of Macedonian protesters kind of were going through the streets of Skopje. They passed through the Albanian section of the city, I think by the Skenderbeg Square, where there's a statue of, the Albanian hero Skenderbeg. You had a small group of Albanian men emerge and start throwing rocks and bottles at the Macedonian protesters. The Macedonians kind of charged at them to confront them, and the Albanians, at least one of the guys, pulled out a handgun, pointed it at the Macedonians, fired a couple shots in the air to kind of keep them at bay. So we're already seeing kind of clashes between Macedonians and Albanians. The Macedonians are also themselves getting frustrated with the Albanians, particularly members of the party DUI, the Democratic Union for Integration, because, for example, one of the party's members, an ethnic Albanian, Bujar Osmani, is the current foreign minister of North Macedonia. And from the way the Macedonians are seeing it, he is a little too willing to compromise with the Bulgarians. They feel that the Albanians who are in positions of power are going to sell out the Macedonian interests in order to give the Bulgarians what they want so that this EU accession process can move forward. So we're seeing frustrations from the Macedonians towards certain ethnic Albanian politicians. Some of the protesters, when they were marching, were shouting ethnic slurs, ethnic Albanian slurs, and so forth. So we're already kind of seeing a lot of potential there for some more large-scale clashes, ethnic tensions, and so forth. Hopefully that doesn't occur, but I certainly think that the possibility is a reality. So, again, unclear on what's going to happen going forward, but that's, what's going on currently from my perspective, from my point of view, as I see things. So let me know what you guys think down below in the comments section as far as, what you think of the protests, what you think of the historical dispute, the dispute between Macedonia and Bulgaria, the whole EU accession process, and whether you think my kind of opinion on what a reasonable compromise would be is realistic or acceptable. Do you think that Macedonia, making historical reforms in exchange for Bulgaria recognizing a Macedonian ethnicity and language, do you guys think that's a fair compromise? Do you think that's going to get it done? Is there the will in both governments to make that happen? Let me know what you think down below. And with that, I'll wrap up this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.